Welcome to Pop Crime TV's The Outlier podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Conlin, and today I'm going to dive into a case out of my home state, New Hampshire. And if you're familiar with the tragic Harmony Montgomery case, the sweet little 5-year-old girl who was beat to death by her disgusting drug addict father, Adam Montgomery, out of Manchester, New Hampshire, this case takes place a few towns over in Derry. Both Manchester and Derry are considered to be a bit dodgy in certain areas. They are very close in proximity, and it's really interesting because Manchester and Derry, you can turn a corner and see somebody shooting up, and then on the next block, you'll encounter a beautiful, historic theater, and people are going inside this theater, and they're going to see a professional production of 42nd Street. And so it's, like I said, it's an interesting, eclectic place, if you will. And I guess that's kind of all of New Hampshire. I always say that where I'm from in New Hampshire is great because you're an hour from Boston, you're an hour from the Lakes region, you're an hour from the mountains, and you're an hour from the beaches as well. But like I said, one wrong turn and you're going to see some stuff that you wish you didn't see. Now, before I begin, I want to state that some of the names that I will mention in this episode, besides their documented arrests and criminal history, a lot of their behavior is alleged. So please keep that in mind. I also want to thank my friend Dan Bruno for all of his help in researching this case, and also Boston Confidential podcast host Barry McGuire, who was kind enough to share some notes and tips with me. So some things that I've recently thought about with Amanda's case that I do want to point out before diving in. This case appears to be one tangled web, with many of the people allegedly involved either now being dead or incarcerated, or maybe just not a great witness overall. And I do not want this to sound harsh or come off as harsh or insensitive because, look, I cannot imagine being Amanda's family. But I do think that Amanda's case is a recovery over a rescue. I do believe that based on what's available, evidence-wise, that she may sadly be deceased. And I'm trying to be realistic. I am not trying to be insensitive. Of course, there's always a chance that she's alive, and we can hope for that. But for now, I'm going to treat this as a recovery. So Amanda did hang out with some nefarious characters, and I am still unclear of what a possible motive could be for someone to want to hurt Amanda or even kill her. So I'm inclined to think that something happened to her and it was accidental. And if I were to generalize, I would say that some of these, quote, characters, these nefarious characters that I will be referring to, were involved in alleged illegal activity and drugs. That is documented. So maybe there's a chance that Amanda knew too much about something. Maybe she started to ask questions. Or, and this will make a bit more sense later on, did someone give Amanda a drug that was laced with fentanyl, causing an overdose? And did this person panic and hide her body? We know that Amanda was trying to get her life together. Maybe her alleged friends didn't like that. Maybe they got nervous. Would she rat them out on anything that happened prior? So that brings me to my next point, and let's just get this part out of the way. Like all human beings, Amanda was not perfect. She was a single mother of one. She battled with addiction. She once suffered homelessness, and sometimes she resorted to working as a sex worker. However, she was a wonderful mother. She loved her daughter and her family, and she was equally loved back. She was working so hard to live the life that she deserved. And Amanda wasn't this typical addict who would sleep all day and just have no motivation or drive. She really did love Tony Robbins, Lee Brown. She wanted more in life. She was interested in interior design and cosmetology. She had her own unique sense of style. She loved to decorate apartments and even help others decorate their apartments as well. Not to sound like another typical Dateline episode, but Amanda was truly a kind person. She truly was kind. With that being said, let's dive into the suspicious disappearance of 23-year-old Amanda Grazewski. Amanda was last seen on March 17th, 2020. At the time of her disappearance, she was living in Nashua, New Hampshire, which is a town over from Derry and Manchester. And just to give you a little idea about Nashua, please nobody take offense to this, but we called it Trashua growing up. It was just kind of grimy and gross. And look, where I'm from, it's not that much better, so I'm just providing a little bit of context. So Amanda was living in Nashua at a hotel, but her money ran out, so she started staying with friends. And the night she disappeared, she was staying at a residence on 18 Birch Street in Derry, New Hampshire. And the night of her disappearance, her cell phone, purse, and belongings were all left behind the night she disappeared. And guys, we know 9 out of 10 times these important belongings being left behind indicate foul play. Amanda also did not have access to her own vehicle, so she relied heavily on others for rides and things. Amanda's aunt Joan O'Connor recalls the shock of her niece's disappearance to Boston 25, saying, quote, "You just hope that she's out there somewhere and hopefully she'll come back." O'Connor has been relentless in her search for answers, but after 4 years, Amanda's family is still plagued with questions. Derry Police Captain Vernon Thomas also is equally perplexed by Amanda's disappearance, and all I'm going to say to that is, sir, you are the police. This is your job to not be perplexed. Captain Thomas said, quote, "We're not really sure what took place or even the validity of the stories," he said. And I'm assuming that he means the witness stories, which we don't actually know. And I will elaborate on this a bit more later, but this is an active investigation. So I did request the police files via the right to know request. I requested these files from the Derry PD and I received no response. And listen, I understand that they most likely would have not sent these files over due to the fact that the investigation is active, but I think a response would have been nice. Something else that Captain Thomas stated that's in the Boston 25 article, which is also linked out in these episode notes, he made sure to say that the Derry PD has logged over 1,000 hours working on this case. He was really putting it out there. So I'm betting that they are getting a lot of heat. Because listen, I feel like I cover a lot of missing persons cases or I read about them, and it's very rare that law enforcement puts out a number of hours that they've worked on the case. It seems like they're really trying to show that they're not just pushing this case aside because Amanda isn't this blonde girl that was a cheerleader and graduated from University of New Hampshire with a marketing job. So I understand what he's doing. It's just a bit obvious to me. I also find it strange, or found it strange, that any article I came across from the Derry PD, and I went back pretty far, they didn't have what Amanda was last seen wearing listed anywhere. I cannot find that for the life of me, and I feel like that's pretty important. And also, they don't really detail her tattoos, which are important. I mean, you're supposed to note the important features on a missing person's. So I want to just state that Amanda has large butterflies on her right hip, tattoos, and a tattoo of a small heart under her left breast. and a tattoo of a peace sign with a tree on the back of her neck. So, yeah, I'm a little perplexed at why no one's come forward and said this is what Amanda was wearing, and then police could run with that and print that. And I'm assuming that the police have spoken to the people she was last seen with, like I said, but I can't be certain because I don't have access to the police report. And I also mentioned some of these people may not be great witnesses. One other thing that I want to point out is that there is a Facebook group. It's called Amanda Grazewski Missing from Derry, New Hampshire. And when law enforcement appears to be making very little progress, I would go as far as to say that these Facebook groups are where they tend to go to get a lot of their leads. And law enforcement, as well as perpetrators, slide into these groups to monitor them. So they really are important. And I know this might ruffle some feathers, but I believe that Brian Koberger, who is accused of the Idaho college murders, was a part of the Idaho Facebook group under the alias of Papa Rogers. But that's for another day. I just wanted to reiterate that these Facebook groups are so valuable. I don't think people realize how valuable they really are. Let's go back and break down some of the timeline and the various, let's call them persons of interest connected to Amanda's last movements. And in most missing persons cases, I believe that everyone is a suspect until the person is found. I feel like this is the case for so many missing persons cases. So as I mentioned, on the day of her disappearance, Amanda was reportedly staying at 18 Birch Street in Derry, New Hampshire, with a man named Dan Moore. Dan Moore allegedly was a known drug user and dealer, and Dan's history of criminal behavior and his association with some questionable individuals immediately put him on the radar after Amanda disappeared. So Dan Moore had a long history of drug use and erratic behavior. He was known in the area, in the Derry and Manchester, New Hampshire area, for all of this. And his home at Birch Street became this notorious hangout for others involved in the drug trade. So allegedly, after Amanda went missing, Dan was seen rearranging rocks and other objects that were in his basement, which raised red flags among people familiar with the case. But here's the thing, guys. Dan Moore himself died in April of 2024. And this is so chilling. There is nothing online officially confirming his death. No obituaries, no service information. There was just a Facebook post about him. And this was sent to me. And it's been confirmed by the people that knew him. He is deceased. I am assuming it was an overdose or maybe something related to an overdose, but it's unclear. Now, this is really not a good sign because, in my opinion, Dan Moore knew something about Amanda. He knew something that happened that night. I mean, he was there. Dan Moore also had a long-standing friendship with someone else, someone named Jared John Pappalardo. Allegedly, Jared has sold people some bad drugs leading to overdoses and deaths. This is also incredibly crazy. Jared, adding to the insanity, has a cousin named Mara Pappalardo. Mara Pappalardo strangled her 4-year-old toddler to death, killing him, and then attempted to kill her 7-year-old as well. Thank God he lived. Now, her husband came home, Chris Smeltzer, that's his name, and upon finding out what his wife did and seeing this horrific scene, he beat her to death with a flashlight. This is so god-awful. I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's unspeakable. And so Chris Smeltzer, like Dan Moore, was also a heavy drug user, and his sister Julie Smeltzer was a drug user as well who died of an overdose while in Dan Moore's presence back in 2018. Now, to my knowledge, Dan was not charged with anything, nor was he considered responsible for Julie Smeltzer's death. Now do you guys see how confusing and tangled this all is? And the fact that so many of these connections are dead or in prison? So just to recap, Dan Moore has now passed away, but used to hang out with a man named Jared John Pappalardo, who is still alive. And Jared John Pappalardo has a cousin, or had a cousin, named Mara Pappalardo, who killed her son and was also killed by her husband, Chris Smeltzer, who's now in prison. However, Chris Smeltzer's sister, Julie Smeltzer, was killed in 2018, or died of an overdose rather, while in the presence of now deceased Dan Moore. And Dan Moore was one of the last people to allegedly have seen Amanda Grazewski before she disappeared. I also think it's worth mentioning some other names in this dark circle, and a lot of these names pertain to certain theories. It's all alleged, like I said, but a lot of these people hung out in the same circle, and they hung out at 18 Birch Street. So let's dive into some of these individuals possibly connected to Amanda's case. We have Michael Lynch and Lindsay Simon. Michael was convicted of supplying fentanyl to somebody, which resulted in their overdose. And he has a bit of a history with Amanda, and they were connected through some drug deals. But his girlfriend, Lindsay Simon, it was rumored that Lindsay, in a jealous rage, may have done something to Amanda after catching Amanda with Michael Lynch, her boyfriend. This was a theory mentioned to me by a source close to the case, and they also mentioned that after Amanda went missing, Michael Lynch's phone was found wiped clean. I don't know how this person knows that, but they do. Then we have Sandra Moore and Mike Warner. Sandra Moore is Daniel Moore's sister. You know, the deceased Daniel Moore. Now, Sandra was also heavily involved in events leading up to Amanda's disappearance, and reportedly, she was the one that drove Amanda and her brother, Dan Moore, from Nashua to Derry on that fateful day. And some reports suggest that Sandra was hanging out there that night at 18 Birch, as well as her boyfriend, Mike Warner. Mike is a convicted felon. He has quite the record, including a 2013 robbery where he brutally assaulted a convenience store clerk with a tire iron. And then we have someone named Miguel Perez, who is another known alleged drug dealer with ties to Amanda. And Perez had a quote-unquote relationship with her at times. And he was also connected to someone named Alicia Linville. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. But Linville later pointed out a sweater allegedly belonging to Amanda hidden between rocks in a wooded area of Manchester, New Hampshire. Now, this information was also told to me by a source. And then lastly, we have two women who just have ties to the drug scene and this crew in general. And their names are Kathleen Balboni and Cassandra Thornton. And they were also said to be hanging around Birch Street the night that Amanda disappeared. And allegedly, Kathleen, who was once pretty active on social media, has gone silent. Now, this is a lot, guys. I realize that. But this is all the hard information that I have. Now, my thinking here is that in order to give Amanda's family the closure they deserve, I believe the Derry PD needs to bring in a geo-profiler and not the FBI. I believe the FBI is just as overworked as the police. My thought is that the Derry PD needs to bring in a geo-profiler. They need to turn their entire case file over to said geoprofiler and let them work their magic. And if you're not familiar with the profiler, they are a rare breed. I think there are only a handful of them in the country and a bit outside the country, because I do happen to know one out of Canada, and his name is Douglas McGregor, and he and his team actually work on reward money a lot of the time, and sometimes they even split it with family members. So essentially, this costs law enforcement and the small town police departments absolutely nothing. So I just want to read to you a bit more about Doug and what he does and what a geoprofiler does in general. Quote, I use advanced behavioral and analytical techniques to assist law enforcement with criminal investigations and to seek resolutions for families of victims of crime. Geographic profiling is a specialized field in forensic behavior analysis that analyzes the geographic, environmental, spatial, and temporal elements of human behavior. As a GP, my field lies at the intersection of behavioral profiling, science, and technology. I specialize in cases involving serial and violent crime, missing and lost persons, cold and historic cases, locating human remains, and fugitive apprehension. I have also worked cases involving kidnapping, abduction, organized crime, and sex trafficking. Geographic profiling assists law enforcement as an investigative support technique that can generate new lines of inquiry, save time, money, resources, identify behavioral markers and crime scenes, and provide investigative strategies and recommendations in the pursuit of justice. End quote. Doug's team doesn't find the missing person. It's not like he digs up the body or anything like that. What Doug does is he identifies through everything that I just detailed. He identifies the area of where the person could potentially be, narrowing down the investigation, because right now it's like Amanda could be so many different places. A geographic profiler could potentially nail down a certain square footage of where she could be, and that way law enforcement has a specific and targeted spot to search rather than a huge manhunt. So what he does is very effective. I've included Doug's handle and information in the episode notes. And look, I think the only reason that law enforcement wouldn't work with someone like Doug is if they're, let's say, super close to solving their case, or they've done a terrible job and they don't want to share their work or lack thereof just to be criticized. I also want to add that I am a huge fan of the police. I know how overworked and underpaid they are. I am such a Back the Blue supporter, but I just wanted to point all of these things out. And so I do apologize if I came off negative towards the police in any way. I'm not at all. And I do believe they are working on this case. I was just a little disappointed not to get a response about my right to know request. Now, I didn't dive into any unsubstantiated theories too much on this episode, but if you do have additional information that you want to share, you can email me and I will ensure that I get it to the correct person. My email is lauren@popcrime.tv. Amanda, her daughter, and her family deserve justice and closure. I will be sure to update everyone with anything further that comes out, but please be sure to check the episode notes for sources and also how you can contact the Derry PD if you have any information about Amanda. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you like it, don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you listen. I'm Lauren Conlin. Thanks for listening.